Storm Byron just hit Israel. Reportedly one of the strongest storms the region has seen in 10 years. Coastal areas around Tel Aviv are flooded. Reports show people being rescued from cars trapped in rising water. But here's what makes this different. The rainfall is massive enough that even desert regions are experiencing accumulation. Water that normally drains or evaporates is pooling in areas that rarely see this much precipitation. And while Israel deals with too much water, Iran is facing the opposite extreme. Reports suggest their drought has reached historic levels, with some sources claiming, "We'll get to Iran in a moment," because what's happening in Israel right now deserves your full attention. The storm hit the coastal regions hardest. Yavne, Tel Aviv. Streets turned into rivers within hours. Emergency services have been pulling people from submerged vehicles. Warnings went out to anyone living in lowland areas and desert regions. The Arava, one of the driest places in the country, received alerts for severe rain. Rain in the Arava. But the worst flooding appears to be concentrated in Gaza. The territory is small, densely packed, and the water has nowhere to go. It's accumulating fast. Now, here's where the situation gets complicated. Reports indicate that Hamas operatives are still using the tunnel networks beneath Gaza. Those tunnels, they're flooding. The same storm that's blessing Israel's water reserves might be filling underground passages that were designed to stay hidden and dry. Some are calling it divine intervention. Others say it's just weather. But the timing is what nobody can ignore. Remember that detail about the tunnels flooding. It connects to something we'll see in ancient texts. But first, you need to understand what's happening 200 kilometers to the east. Because while Israel is getting drenched, Iran is drying up. And the contrast between these two situations? It's almost too perfect to be random. Iran is experiencing one of the worst droughts in its recorded history. And the evidence is impossible to ignore. Mount Damavand, Iran's highest peak and the tallest volcano in all of Asia, has been completely snow-free since fall. No snow, no ice, nothing. In 2022, this mountain had at least 3.4 square kilometers of ice coverage. Today, gone. Meteorologists say this is unprecedented, but that's just one mountain. The nationwide picture is far worse. Precipitation levels across Iran have dropped dramatically below average. The fall of 2024 was one of the driest periods in the country's history. Dam reservoirs that supply water to major cities, especially Tehran, have dropped to critically low levels. The government has been forced to implement water rationing and emergency measures. And then the drought revealed something nobody expected. The Karaj Dam started drying up. As water levels fell, something appeared that had been hidden underwater for years. Bodies. At least 74 of them have been recovered so far. Officials believe these are executed political dissidents, people who opposed the regime and disappeared. The drought didn't just create a water crisis, it exposed a mass grave. Meteorological data shows Iran is the fastest warming region in the area. Temperatures have risen more than 2 degrees Celsius since the 1960s, and this pattern is accelerating. The heat is increasing faster each year. Tehran itself is facing what some are calling a day zero scenario, the point when water reservoirs run completely dry. The situation has gotten so dire that Iran's president publicly proposed relocating the capital city, moving it, abandoning Tehran entirely. Think about that. A city of 10 million people, and they're discussing evacuation because the water is running out. But here's what makes this story even stranger. While Iran struggles to supply water to its population, Israel has become the regional champion of water management. And the difference between these two countries isn't just luck, it's strategy. Israel has limited natural water resources. Always has. But decades ago, they made a decision that changed everything. They invested heavily in desalination, turning Mediterranean seawater into drinking water. They built wastewater recycling systems. They developed drip irrigation technology that uses a fraction of the water traditional farming requires. And they created a nationwide coordination system to manage every drop. The result? Israel doesn't just meet its water needs, it has a surplus, even during severe droughts. Iran took a different path. Decades of poor water governance led to over-extraction of groundwater. Agricultural irrigation remained inefficient. Dams were mismanaged, and there was no unified national strategy to address the growing crisis. The problems compounded year after year. Today, Israel produces most of its water from desalination plants along the Mediterranean coast. That water flows through a national grid all the way to the Negev Desert, one of the driest regions on the planet. It supports farms, it supports cities, it even supports reforestation projects. The desert is turning green, not metaphorically, literally. Satellite images show vegetation spreading across areas that were barren just decades ago. And when you see desert land becoming fruitful, something clicks. Because there are ancient texts that describe exactly this scenario. Deserts blooming, water flowing where it never existed. Some call it coincidence. Others see it as something else entirely. There's a passage in Isaiah 35 that describes something specific. The wilderness and the desert will rejoice. The desert will blossom like a crocus. It will bloom profusely and rejoice with joy. When this was written, it sounded poetic, symbolic, maybe even impossible. But look at Israel today. Large portions of the Negev Desert have been converted into productive farmland. They used drip irrigation systems that deliver water directly to plant roots with minimal waste. They built greenhouses that control every environmental variable. They ran desalination pipelines hundreds of miles inland, and they implemented wastewater treatment that recycles nearly everything. Satellite imagery now shows sections of the Negev turning green. This isn't a figure of speech. The desert is literally changing color. Isaiah 41 describes rivers appearing in the desert, springs in the wasteland, places where water simply didn't exist before suddenly having flowing water. Israel is currently piping desalinated Mediterranean seawater across hundreds of miles into the Negev. Desert reservoirs have been built to store harvested rainwater in regions that never had permanent water sources. And the seasonal wadis, dry riverbeds that only filled during rare storms, are now flowing more consistently. The idea of water appearing where it never was before is becoming reality. Then there's Isaiah 51. It talks about wilderness becoming like Eden, the desert transformed into something resembling a garden. Joy and gladness found there. Israel has planted over 250 million trees. Let that number sink in. 250 million trees, many of them inside desert regions. The Yatir Forest, the Lahav Forest, Ben Shemen Forest. These aren't small projects. These are massive reforestation efforts in areas that were completely barren. The forests stabilize soil. They provide shade that changes local temperatures. They actually improve rainfall patterns by affecting atmospheric conditions. The transformation from empty desert to thriving forest mirrors what Isaiah described. Isaiah 43 mentions making a way in the wilderness, creating paths where none existed. Modern highways now cut through the Negev. Railway lines connect desert cities. Beersheba has become a major technology center. New military bases and academic campuses have opened deep in desert territory. The wilderness isn't just habitable now, it's developed, connected, thriving. And then there's the agriculture. Ezekiel 36 describes desolate land becoming like the Garden of Eden. The Arava region is one of the driest places on Earth. Brutal heat, almost no rainfall. And yet, this area now exports peppers, melons, tomatoes, dates, and flowers to international markets. Nearly 60% of Israel's winter vegetables come from desert farms in regions that should be completely barren. This matches what Ezekiel wrote about desolate land becoming productive and fruitful. But there's a prophecy that goes even further, one that hasn't happened yet, and it involves the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth. It's also the saltiest. Nothing lives there. No fish, no plants. Nothing can survive in water that concentrated with salt and minerals. It's called dead for a reason. But Ezekiel describes a future where the Dead Sea becomes fresh, where fish multiply in water that currently kills everything, where people fish along shores that are toxic today. This would require a complete ecological transformation, something that defies natural processes. So where would this fresh water come from? Ezekiel describes a supernatural river flowing from beneath a temple in Jerusalem, water flowing eastward from under the threshold, growing deeper as it travels. By the time it reaches the Dead Sea, it's deep enough to swim in. The prophet Zechariah adds another detail. He says living waters will flow out of Jerusalem in two directions, half toward the eastern sea, the Dead Sea, half toward the western sea, the Mediterranean, summer and winter, continuously. Two rivers, both originating from Jerusalem, one flowing west, one flowing east, bringing life everywhere they touch. In recent years, freshwater sinkholes have started appearing along the Dead Sea's shores. Scientists have found algae and microorganisms in some of these pools. This isn't the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy, but it creates an eerie parallel. And Jerusalem? It has a history with water that most people don't know about. Jerusalem sits on mountains. It's dry, hot, not the kind of place you'd expect to support a major city. And yet, it had water, one natural freshwater source that made everything possible, the Gihon Spring. This spring, located on the eastern slope of the city of David, is Jerusalem's only natural water source, one of the most reliable springs in the entire Judean hills. Without it, the city couldn't have existed. The spring provided steady water for drinking, agriculture, and ritual purification. Kings defended it, protected it, built systems around it. In the Bible, King Solomon was anointed at the Gihon Spring. The location wasn't random. Water represented life, authority, divine provision. Anointing a king at the water source connected royal power to the source of life itself. But the spring had a problem. It was outside the city walls, vulnerable. In the 8th century BC, when the Assyrian army threatened Jerusalem, King Hezekiah made a decision. He ordered workers to dig a tunnel, 533 meters long, through solid bedrock. The goal was to divert the spring water inside the city walls, where enemies couldn't cut off the supply. The tunnel still exists. You can walk through it today. It's considered one of the most impressive engineering projects of the ancient world, and it shows you how valuable water was. It meant survival. It meant life or death. The water flowed through Hezekiah's tunnel into the Pool of Siloam. This pool became Jerusalem's first major internal water reservoir. It served multiple purposes: ritual purification before entering the temple, irrigation for nearby gardens, and a backup water supply during sieges. In the New Testament, Jesus healed a man born blind at the Pool of Siloam. The man washed in the water and gained sight. The symbolism is deliberate: water representing cleansing, life, divine presence. Jerusalem wasn't just a political capital. It was seen as a spiritual source of life. The temple required water for priestly purification. The Temple Mount contained massive underground cisterns to store rainwater. During the Feast of Sukkot, priests performed water-pouring ceremonies symbolizing rain and blessing. Water flowing from Jerusalem wasn't just practical, it was prophetic. So when does all of this actually happen? When does the supernatural river flow? When does the Dead Sea come to life? According to the texts, it starts with the Messiah reigning in Jerusalem. Isaiah says, "Nations will come to learn his ways." A new temple stands on Mount Zion. Ezekiel describes God's presence returning to dwell among his people. Then the river flows from Jerusalem. Ezekiel says it brings healing wherever it goes. The Dead Sea transforms. Fish return. Trees grow along the banks. Life spreads to places that were completely dead. The desert blooms like Eden. Isaiah repeats this image multiple times. Living waters flow across the land. Creation itself is restored. Peace and abundance cover the earth. Everything hinges on one event: the Messiah's arrival, God's presence returning to the city. Israel's current water systems, the desalination, the desert farms, the reforestation, they're not the fulfillment, but they're creating the infrastructure, preparing the landscape, making the impossible seem suddenly possible. Storm Byron just flooded Israeli deserts. Iran's capital is running dry. Ancient prophecies describe water flowing from Jerusalem in both directions, east and west. The pattern is forming. But the question nobody's answering is simple. When does the river actually start flowing?